The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear one final time. The weight of her sniper rifle felt familiar against her back, a trusted companion that had never failed her in 3 years of active duty. At 26, she was the youngest female Navy SEAL sniper in her unit, and today would mark her most dangerous mission yet. "Martinez, you ready for this?" called out Lieutenant Commander Jake Thompson, the team leader who had become like a big brother to her over the years. His weathered face showed the strain of countless missions, but his eyes held the same fierce determination that had earned him respect throughout the Special Forces community. "Born ready, sir," Sarah replied with a confident smile that masked the butterflies dancing in her stomach. She had learned early in her military career that showing weakness was not an option, especially as one of only 3 women in their elite unit. The briefing room buzzed with quiet conversation as the 8-member team gathered around the large table covered with maps, satellite images, and intelligence reports. The mission was complex. Infiltrate a terrorist compound deep in hostile territory, extract a captured American diplomat, and neutralize the threat before enemy reinforcements arrived. "Listen up, people," Commander Thompson began, his voice cutting through the chatter. "This is not a drill. Intelligence suggests that Ambassador Williams is being held in this compound approximately 200 miles behind enemy lines. Our window of opportunity is narrow. We have exactly 72 hours before they move him to an unknown location." Sarah studied the aerial photographs spread across the table. The compound sat atop a rocky hill, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides and open desert to the east. Multiple guard towers dotted the perimeter, and thermal imaging revealed at least 30 hostile combatants within the walls. "Martinez, you'll be positioned here." Thompson pointed to a ridge approximately 800 meters from the main building. "Your job is to provide overwatch and eliminate any threats that compromise the extraction. Rodriguez and Chim will approach from the north, while Davis and Peterson take the southern route." Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez nodded grimly. He was Sarah's closest friend in the unit, a man who had saved her life twice and never let her forget it. "What about backup communications if primary goes down?" "That's where it gets tricky," Thompson admitted, his expression darkening. "We'll be operating in a communication dead zone for most of the mission. Once we're inserted, we're on our own until extraction at the designated landing zone." The next several hours passed in a blur of equipment checks, route memorization, and final preparations. Sarah carefully cleaned and calibrated her rifle, a custom-built weapon that could accurately hit targets at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. Each bullet was hand-selected, each adjustment precise to the millimeter. As evening approached, the team gathered for their traditional pre-mission meal. It was a superstition that had developed over years of dangerous operations. Share a meal together before heading into harm's way. The cafeteria was nearly empty, most other personnel having finished dinner hours earlier. "Remember that time Martinez took out 3 tangos with 3 shots in under 10 seconds? Rodriguez laughed, trying to lighten the mood that had grown increasingly somber as departure time approached. "That was nothing compared to Peterson's legendary fall into that mud pit during the Colombian operation," Sarah shot back, earning chuckle from around the table. Corporal James Peterson, a demolitions expert with a dry sense of humor, raised his coffee cup in mock salute. "Hey, that mud pit was strategically important. I was conducting reconnaissance." "You were conducting a faceplant," added Sergeant Lisa Chun, the team's communications specialist and the only other woman in their unit. Chun had become Sarah's mentor and closest confidant, helping her navigate the challenges of being a woman in an overwhelmingly male profession. The laughter felt forced, everyone aware that this could be the last time they sat together like this. Military life was unpredictable, and special operations carried risks that everyone understood but rarely discussed openly. Later that evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, writing letters that she hoped would never need to be delivered. One to her parents back in Texas, thanking them for their unwavering support even when they didn't understand her choice to join military. Another to her younger sister Maria, encouraging her to pursue her dreams of becoming a doctor. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Chen stood in the hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Mind if I come in?" she asked, already stepping through the doorway. "Couldn't sleep either?" Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, gesturing for Chun to take the only chair while she sat on the edge of her narrow bed. "Never can before a big one," Chun admitted. "Been doing this for 8 years, and I still get nervous." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Chun was 32, a veteran of dozens of operations who had earned her place through skill and determination. Her presence always brought Sarah comfort. "You know," Chun finally said, "when I first started, there weren't many of us. Had to prove myself every single day. Still do sometimes. Does it ever get easier?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on her mind for months. "The missions get routine, but the pressure? The feeling that you have to be twice as good to get half the recognition? That never really goes away." Chin's expression was thoughtful. "But you've already proven yourself, Sarah. This team trusts you with their lives. That's not something they give lightly." The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Chin's plans to visit her family in California after their deployment ended, Sarah's dreams of eventually becoming a training instructor. They had become more than colleagues. They were sisters in arms, bound together by shared experiences that few people could understand. At 0400 hours, the team assembled on the tarmac where a sleek helicopter waited in the pre-dawn darkness. The aircraft was specially modified for stealth operations, its engine noise dampened and radar signature minimized. Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that always preceded a mission. The flight to the insertion point would take 3 hours, crossing over mountains and desert terrain that few humans had ever seen. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Rifle, ammunition, communication gear, survival supplies, and medical kit. Everything was exactly where it should be. 5 minutes to drop zone. The pilot announced through their headsets as the helicopter descended toward a moonlit valley. Below them, the landscape looked desolate and forbidding, a reminder of how far they were from friendly territory. The team moved with practiced efficiency as the aircraft touched down briefly on a rocky plateau. Within seconds, all 8 team members had disembarked and were moving toward their staging area, a small cave system that would provide concealment during the daylight hours. "Communications check," whispered Chun into her radio. One by one, each team member confirmed their equipment was functioning properly. Sarah's voice was steady as she reported in, though her heart was racing with anticipation. The hike to their observation positions took 4 hours through treacherous terrain. Sarah's destination was a rocky outcropping that provided an excellent view of the target compound while offering natural concealment. As the sun began to rise, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and red, she settled into position and began her surveillance. Through her scope, Sarah could see guards patrolling the compound's perimeter. She counted 18 visible hostiles and made note of their patrol patterns, weapon types, and defensive positions. This information would be crucial when the assault phase began in 12 hours. The day passed slowly as Sarah maintained her watch, occasionally reporting observations to the team through whispered radio transmissions. The heat was oppressive, and she had to ration her water carefully while remaining alert for any changes in the enemy's routine. As afternoon turned to evening, Sarah noticed increased activity within the compound. More guards were posted, and several vehicles arrived carrying what appeared to be additional personnel. Her heart sank as she realized their intelligence had been incomplete. The enemy force was larger than expected. "Command, this is Overwatch," she whispered into her radio. "I count at least 40 hostiles now, maybe more. They seem to be expecting something." Thompson's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Copy that, Overwatch. We proceed as planned. Too late to change course now." At 2,200 hours, the assault began. Sarah watched through her scope as Rodriguez and Chun approached the northern wall, while Davis, and Peterson moved into position from the south. Her role was to eliminate sentries and provide covering fire, allowing her teammates to breach the compound's defenses. Her first shot was perfect, dropping a guard tower sentry before he could raise an alarm. The suppressed rifle made barely a whisper, and the guard simply slumped forward without a sound. Sarah immediately acquired her next target, another sentry who was turning to investigate his partner's sudden silence. The second shot was equally precise, and Sarah felt the familiar calm that settled over her during combat. Time seemed to slow as she methodically eliminated threats, each shot carefully calculated and executed. This was what she had trained for, what she excelled at. Overwatch, we're taking heavy fire at the south entrance. Davis's voice was strained through the radio. Need immediate support. Sarah shifted her aim toward the southern section of the compound, where muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions. She could see Davis and Peterson pinned down behind a concrete barrier, unable to advance or retreat. Without hesitation, she began engaging the hostile positions, her shots forcing the enemy combatants to seek cover. That's better. Peterson's relief was evident in his voice. Thanks for the assist, Overwatch. The battle continued for what felt like hours, but was actually only 30 minutes. Sarah's ammunition was running low when Thompson's voice came through her earpiece with the news she had been waiting for. Package secured. All teams, fall back to extraction point Alpha. Sarah began breaking down her position, preparing to move to the designated helicopter landing zone 3 kilometers to the east. As she gathered her equipment, she noticed movement in the compound that made her blood run cold. A large group of enemy reinforcements was approaching from the west, their headlights visible across the desert. Command, this is Overwatch. We have a problem. Estimate 50 to 60 hostiles approaching from the west. They'll reach the compound in 10 minutes. The radio was silent for a moment before Thompson responded. All teams, expedite movement to extraction point. We need to be airborne before those reinforcements arrive. Sarah shouldered her pack and began the treacherous descent from her position. The route to the extraction point led through a narrow canyon that provided cover, but also created a natural choke point. If the enemy reached the canyon first, the entire team would be trapped. Moving as quickly as safety allowed, Sarah navigated the rocky terrain by moonlight. Her training had prepared her for this type of movement, but the weight of her equipment and the urgency of the situation made every step a challenge. She was halfway through the canyon when the sound of helicopter rotors reached her ears. The extraction aircraft was approaching on schedule, which meant she had less than 5 minutes to reach the landing zone. Sarah pushed herself harder, ignoring the burning in her lungs and the sharp rocks that threatened to turn her ankle with each step. The canyon opened into a small valley where the rest of her team was already waiting. Sarah could see the helicopter approaching from the east, its navigation lights barely visible against the star-filled sky. She was going to make it. Then, everything went wrong. The explosion came from behind her, lighting up the night sky and sending a shockwave through the canyon. Sarah was thrown forward by the blast, her equipment scattered across the rocky ground. As she struggled to regain her footing, she could hear the sound of enemy vehicles entering the far end of the canyon. Overwatch report. Thompson's voice was urgent through her earpiece. I'm trapped, Sarah replied, gathering her rifle and checking for injuries. She had cuts on her hands and face, but nothing serious. Enemy force is in the canyon behind me. I can't reach the LZ. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Sarah could hear the helicopter hovering nearby, waiting for orders. She knew the team had seconds to decide between waiting for her and risking everyone's lives or leaving her behind to ensure the mission's success. Negative, Overwatch. Thompson's voice was heavy with emotion. We cannot wait. Too many hostiles. We'll come back for you. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized what was happening. The team was leaving without her. She was going to be stranded behind enemy lines with no backup and no way to communicate with friendly forces. Understood, Command, she replied, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. Complete the mission. I'll find another way out. As the sound of the helicopter faded into the distance, Sarah found herself alone in hostile territory, with enemy forces closing in from multiple directions. She had survived the mission and helped rescue the ambassador, but now faced the greatest challenge of her military career. The woman who had proven herself time and again among the elite special forces would now have to prove that she could survive on her own in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. With limited supplies and no backup coming, Sarah Martinez disappeared into the darkness, beginning a journey that would test every skill she had ever learned and every ounce of courage she possessed. Sarah crouched behind a large boulder, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts as she listened to the voices of enemy soldiers searching the canyon. They were speaking in Arabic, their tone urgent and aggressive. She understood enough of the language to know they were looking for the American sniper who had killed their comrades. The moonlight that had helped her navigate earlier now worked against her, casting shadows that could either hide her or reveal her position. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the rocky crevice, feeling the sharp edges cut through her tactical vest. Blood from the explosion had dried on her face, and every muscle in her body ached. Her radio crackled softly with static, but she dared not respond. The enemy likely had equipment to track radio transmissions, and any communication could reveal her location. Sarah was truly on her own now, with only her training and instincts to keep her alive. As the search party moved closer, Sarah made a difficult decision. She couldn't stay hidden indefinitely, and waiting would only give them more time to organize a systematic search. She needed to move, and she needed to move now. Slowly, Sarah began crawling away from the voices, staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. Every movement had to be deliberate and silent. A single loose rock could betray her position and bring down the full force of the enemy unit. The terrain worked in her favor as she moved deeper into the rocky landscape. The area was riddled with caves and crevices that provided natural hiding spots, but it also made navigation extremely difficult in the darkness. Sarah had studied maps of the region, but being lost in hostile territory was a very real possibility. After moving for 2 hours, Sarah found a small cave that offered concealment and a defensive position. She crawled inside, grateful for the shelter, but aware that she could easily become trapped if discovered. The cave was shallow, maybe 10 feet deep, with a narrow opening that would be difficult to spot from a distance. Sarah used her survival training to assess her situation. She had her rifle with 37 rounds remaining, a sidearm with 2 spare magazines, basic medical supplies, water for perhaps 2 days, and energy bars that would last 3 days if rationed carefully. Most importantly, she had a survival radio with limited battery life for emergency use only. The biggest challenge was her location. She was approximately 200 miles from the nearest friendly territory, with hostile forces actively searching for her. The landscape was harsh desert and mountains with very little water or shelter. Even if she could evade capture, the journey to safety would test every survival skill she possessed. As dawn approached, Sarah allowed herself a few hours of rest. She set her watch to wake her in 4 hours, knowing that traveling during daylight would be extremely dangerous, but necessary if she hoped to put distance between herself and her pursuers. The sun rose quickly in the desert, and with it came oppressive heat that would soon make travel nearly impossible. Sarah drank sparingly from her water supply and ate half of an energy bar, knowing she needed to conserve her supplies for the long journey ahead. Through the cave opening, she could see the landscape that stretched endlessly in all directions. To the east lay the most direct route to friendly territory, but it was also the route her pursuers would expect her to take. To the west was deeper enemy territory, but the terrain offered better concealment. North and south were equally challenging, with no clear advantages. Sarah made the difficult decision to head south, toward a range of mountains that appeared on her map as largely uninhabited. The route would be longer and more treacherous, but it offered the best chance of avoiding enemy patrols while finding sources of water and shelter. Before leaving the cave, Sarah took inventory of everything in her pack. She discarded non-essential items to reduce weight, keeping only what was absolutely necessary for survival. Every ounce mattered when facing a journey that could take weeks. The first day of travel was brutal. The heat reached over 100 degrees, and the rocky terrain made each step a challenge. Sarah moved during the early morning and late evening, sheltering during the hottest parts of the day in whatever shade she could find. Her military training had prepared her for this type of survival situation, but the reality was far more difficult than any exercise. The constant stress of being hunted, combined with the physical demands of desert travel, pushed her to her limits within the first 24 hours. On the second day, Sarah encountered her first major obstacle. A wide valley stretched before her, offering no concealment and likely to be patrolled by enemy forces. She would have to find a way around, adding days to her journey, or risk crossing during darkness. As she studied the valley through her rifle scope, Sarah spotted something that made her heart race. Dust clouds on the horizon indicated vehicles moving in her direction. The search was expanding, and her window of opportunity was closing quickly. Sarah chose to risk the valley crossing during the pre-dawn hours, when visibility was lowest, but enough light remained for her to navigate safely. She moved quickly, but carefully, aware that she was completely exposed for several miles. Halfway across the valley, Sarah heard the sound that every soldier fears when alone in hostile territory: helicopters. The aircraft appeared from the north, flying a search pattern that would bring them directly over her position within minutes. With no cover available, Sarah did the only thing she could. She pressed herself flat against the ground and remained absolutely motionless, hoping that the helicopter crew would not spot a lone figure in the vast landscape. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure it could be heard over the rotor noise. The helicopter passed overhead twice, so close that Sarah could feel the downdraft from its rotors. She remained frozen for what felt like hours, but was actually only 15 minutes. When the aircraft finally moved on, Sarah resumed her movement with renewed urgency. The mountains offered blessed relief from the desert heat and better concealment from aerial searches. Sarah found a stream on the third day, allowing her to refill her water containers for the first time since leaving the cave. The cold, clear water was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. In the mountains, Sarah's pace improved significantly. The terrain was challenging, but her training had included extensive mountain warfare exercises. She knew how to move efficiently through rocky terrain while minimizing the risk of injury. On the fourth night, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in a remote valley was an abandoned village, probably deserted for decades based on the condition of the buildings. More importantly, the village had a well that still contained fresh water. Sarah approached carefully, checking for any signs of recent habitation or military activity. The buildings were empty except for debris and the occasional small animal. It appeared to be exactly what it seemed: a forgotten settlement in a remote mountain valley. The village became Sarah's base camp for 3 days while she rested and planned the next phase of her journey. She was able to improve her water situation significantly and even found some dried foods that, while old, were still edible. More importantly, the village had something Sarah hadn't expected: a radio. It was an old civilian model, probably left behind when the residents departed, but it still functioned. Sarah carefully tuned through the frequencies, hoping to pick up any friendly communications. What she heard instead was enemy radio traffic discussing the search for the missing American soldier. They had found the canyon where she had been trapped and were expanding their search in all directions. Worse, they had brought in additional units specifically trained for tracking individuals through wilderness terrain. The radio intercepts told Sarah something else that chilled her to the bone. Her own team believed she was dead. The enemy had claimed to have killed the American sniper, and without any communication from Sarah, there was no reason to doubt the report. This realization hit Sarah harder than any physical challenge she had faced. Not only was she fighting for survival in hostile territory, but her own people had given up hope of finding her alive. No rescue mission was coming. No one was looking for her. Sarah spent an entire day processing this information and adjusting her mental approach to the situation. She could no longer think of this as a temporary survival situation until rescue arrived. This was now a solo escape and evasion mission with no backup and no support. The psychological impact was enormous. Sarah had always been able to draw strength from knowing her team was counting on her, and that they would never leave her behind permanently. Learning that they believed she was dead created a loneliness unlike anything she had ever experienced. But Sarah Martinez was not the type of person to give up, even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. If anything, the knowledge that no one was coming for her only strengthened her resolve. She would prove that she was still alive by walking out of enemy territory on her own terms. On the 7th day since being left behind, Sarah departed the village with renewed purpose. Her destination was still over 100 miles away, through some of the most challenging terrain in the region. But she now had a full water supply and a better understanding of enemy search patterns. The next phase of her journey took her through a series of deep canyons that offered excellent concealment, but presented new challenges. Flash floods had carved these canyons over thousands of years, creating a maze of passages that could easily lead to dead ends or dangerous climbing situations. Sarah's navigation skills were put to the test as she worked her way through the canyon system. Her map was helpful, but not detailed enough for this type of terrain. She was essentially feeling her way forward, hoping each choice would lead her closer to safety rather than deeper into danger. On the 10th day, Sarah faced her most dangerous encounter yet. While moving through a narrow canyon in the early morning hours, she rounded a bend and came face to face with two enemy soldiers who were just as surprised to see her as she was to see them. The moment seemed to last forever as all three people processed what was happening. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Her rifle was already in her hands, and she fired twice before the enemy soldiers could react. Both men dropped without firing a shot. Sarah's hands shook as the adrenaline coursed through her system. It was the first time since the mission began that she had been forced to kill at close range. During the assault on the compound, her targets had been distant figures through a rifle scope. This was personal and immediate in a way that affected her deeply. She quickly searched the bodies and discovered something that changed her situation dramatically. The soldiers had been carrying detailed maps of the region, including the locations of all enemy outposts and patrol routes. Even better, they had a military-grade GPS device that would make navigation much more precise. But the encounter also meant that her location was now known. These soldiers would be missed eventually, and when they were found, the enemy would know exactly where to focus their search. Sarah had to move faster now, even if it meant taking greater risks. Using the captured maps and GPS device, Sarah was able to plot a more direct route to friendly territory. The path would take her through several areas marked as having enemy presence, but it would also cut days off her journey. With her supplies running low and pursuit closing in, speed was now more important than stealth. The stolen intelligence revealed something else that gave Sarah hope. There was a friendly outpost marked on the map, much closer than the main base she had been trying to reach. It was a small forward operating base, probably no more than a platoon-sized unit, but they would have communication equipment and medical supplies. Sarah's goal changed from reaching friendly territory to reaching the forward operating base. It was still over 50 miles away through enemy-controlled terrain, but it was achievable. For the first time since being left behind, Sarah allowed herself to believe that she might actually make it home. The journey to the forward operating base would require everything Sarah had learned in 12 days of survival and evasion. She was physically exhausted, mentally drained, and emotionally battered by the knowledge that her own team thought she was dead. But she was still alive, still fighting, and still determined to prove them wrong. The stolen GPS device became Sarah's lifeline as she navigated through increasingly dangerous territory. The enemy maps revealed a network of patrol routes and checkpoints that she had to avoid while making progress toward the forward operating base. Every mile brought new challenges and forced her to make life-or-death decisions about route selection and timing. Sarah's physical condition was deteriorating after nearly 2 weeks in the field. Her body weight had dropped significantly due to limited food supplies and the constant physical stress of travel. Her boots were wearing through, making each step painful on the rocky terrain. Most concerning was a persistent cough that had developed, possibly from dust exposure or the beginning of a respiratory infection. Despite her declining health, Sarah's mental state had actually improved since discovering the enemy maps. Having a clear objective and route to follow gave her a sense of purpose that had been missing during the earlier phase of her escape. She was no longer just running away from danger. She was moving towards safety with a plan. The terrain in this region was a mixture of desert valleys and rocky hills, providing both advantages and disadvantages for someone trying to move unseen. The open areas offered good visibility to spot threats, but left Sarah exposed to observation. The hilly regions provided concealment, but slowed her movement and created opportunities for ambush. On the 14th day, Sarah encountered evidence that the enemy's search was intensifying. Fresh tire tracks in several locations indicated recent vehicle patrols, and she twice had to hide while helicopters conducted low-level searches of the area. The enemy clearly suspected she was still alive and operating in the region. The psychological pressure of being constantly hunted was perhaps the most difficult aspect of Sarah's ordeal. Every sound could indicate approaching danger. Every movement in her peripheral vision might be an enemy scout. The stress was exhausting and required constant mental discipline to prevent panic from clouding her judgment. Sarah's training had covered escape and evasion scenarios, but the reality was far more challenging than any exercise. In training, there were safety nets and predetermined endpoints. Here, there were no second chances. A single mistake could result in capture or death, and the weight of that knowledge was overwhelming at times. Sleep became increasingly difficult as Sarah's anxiety levels rose. She was forced to rest in whatever concealment she could find, often uncomfortable positions that prevented deep sleep. The lack of quality rest compounded her physical deterioration and made decision-making more difficult. On the 16th day, Sarah faced a major decision point. The most direct route to the forward operating base required crossing a main road that appeared to be heavily patrolled. The alternative was a longer route through mountainous terrain that would add at least 3 days to her journey. With her supplies nearly exhausted, 3 extra days might be impossible. Sarah spent hours observing the road from a hidden position, noting the timing and frequency of patrols. Enemy vehicles passed approximately every 2 hours during daylight, but the schedule was irregular enough to prevent easy prediction. Night crossings appeared slightly safer, but the area was illuminated by floodlights at regular intervals. The decision ultimately came down to risk versus time. Sarah chose the direct route, planning to cross the road during the darkest part of the night, when patrol activity seemed to be at its lowest level. It was a calculated gamble that could either save her life or end it. The road crossing required careful preparation and precise timing. Sarah positioned herself in a drainage ditch approximately 50 meters from the pavement, giving her a clear view in both directions. She waited until the patrol schedule indicated the longest window between vehicles, then moved quickly across the exposed area. Halfway across the road, Sarah heard the sound of approaching engines. She dove into the ditch on the far side, just as headlights appeared around a bend. The vehicles passed within meters of her position, and she could hear voices speaking in Arabic as the patrol continued its routine sweep. Sarah remained motionless in the ditch for another hour before finally moving away from the road. The crossing had been successful, but it served as a reminder of how precarious her situation remained. She was still deep in enemy territory with many miles to go before reaching safety. The landscape beyond the road was different from what Sarah had encountered previously. This area showed signs of recent human activity, including abandoned campsites and vehicle tracks. She was entering a region that was more actively used by enemy forces, requiring even greater caution. On the 18th day, Sarah discovered something that both encouraged and worried her. Fresh footprints in a sandy wash indicated that American forces had recently been in the area. The boot treads were clearly military issue, different from the enemy footwear she had observed earlier. The footprints suggested that friendly patrols were operating closer than Sarah had expected, which meant she might be near the forward operating base. However, it also meant that combat activity was occurring in the region, making travel even more dangerous. She could easily be caught between opposing forces. Sarah began to modify her movement patterns, traveling only during daylight hours when friendly forces would be more likely to identify her as American rather than enemy. She also prepared recognition signals that she could use if encountered by American patrols. The challenge of identifying herself to friendly forces was significant. After nearly 3 weeks in the field, Sarah bore little resemblance to a uniformed American soldier. Her clothing was torn and dirty, her appearance was haggard, and she was carrying enemy equipment taken from the soldiers she had killed. Any patrol encountering her would likely assume she was hostile. Sarah's solution was to prepare a combination of verbal challenges and responses that only American military personnel would know, along with personal information that could be verified if necessary. She also practiced American English phrases that would be difficult for enemy personnel to mimic convincingly. On the 20th day, Sarah finally saw her destination. The forward operating base was located on a hilltop approximately 5 miles away, its defensive positions and communication antennas clearly visible through her rifle scope. After 3 weeks of uncertainty, she could actually see the goal she had been struggling to reach. But seeing the base also revealed the final challenge of her journey. The approaches were completely open, offering no concealment for the last several miles. Worse, the base appeared to be on high alert, with increased patrol activity and defensive preparations that suggested recent combat in the area. Sarah realized that simply walking up to the base would likely result in her being shot as a potential threat. She needed a way to identify herself from a distance and coordinate her approach with the base personnel. The problem was communication. Her survival radio had a limited range that might not reach the base from her current position. The solution came from an unexpected source. Sarah remembered that military bases maintained radio watch on emergency frequencies, including some used by downed aircraft. Her survival radio could transmit on those frequencies, giving her a way to contact the base before approaching. Sarah spent the entire day preparing for the final phase of her escape. She found a position that offered the best possible radio reception while providing concealment from ground observation. She also planned multiple approach routes and escape options in case the contact attempt went wrong. As evening approached, Sarah made her first radio transmission in over 3 weeks. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke into the small microphone, identifying herself and requesting assistance. The response was immediate and startling in its intensity. Unknown station, this is Firebase Delta. You're transmitting on a restricted frequency. Identify yourself immediately or face engagement. Sarah took a deep breath and transmitted the information that she hoped would save her life. Firebase Delta, this is Navy SEAL Sarah Martinez, service number 1847392. I am a missing sniper from Operation Desert Storm. I am requesting immediate assistance and extraction. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Sarah could imagine the confusion and verification process occurring at the base as personnel tried to confirm whether her transmission was legitimate or some kind of enemy deception. Finally, a different voice came through her radio speaker. Martinez, this is Colonel Harrison, base commander. You've been declared Kia 3 weeks ago. We need verification of your identity before we can proceed. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah answered dozens of questions about her background, training, unit assignments, and personal information that only the real Sarah Martinez would know. The process was emotionally draining as she was forced to prove her own identity to people who should have been searching for her. Eventually, Colonel Harrison was satisfied that the transmission was genuine. Martinez, we're going to bring you in, but this has to be done carefully. We've had increased enemy activity in this area, and we can't take any chances. The extraction process was complex and dangerous. Sarah had to move to a designated pickup point during darkness while avoiding enemy patrols that were still searching for her. A small team from the base would meet her halfway, providing security for the final approach. As Sarah prepared to leave her hiding place for what she hoped would be the last time, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 3 weeks ago, she had been a confident member of an elite military unit. Now she was a survivor who had endured experiences that would change her forever. The woman who walked toward the pickup point that night was different from the one who had been left behind in the canyon. She had been tested in ways that few people ever experience and had emerged stronger despite her physical exhaustion. Sarah Martinez was coming home, but she was not the same person who had left. The reunion with American forces was emotional and overwhelming. The rescue team could hardly believe they were looking at someone who had been declared dead weeks earlier. Sarah's appearance shocked everyone who saw her. She had lost significant weight, her skin was weathered and scarred, and her eyes held the haunted look of someone who had seen too much. But Sarah Martinez was alive. Against all odds, the female Navy SEAL sniper had survived 3 weeks alone in enemy territory and made her way to safety through skill, determination, and sheer force of will. Her journey was over, but her story was just beginning. The debriefings would come later. The medical examinations, psychological evaluations, and official reports could wait. For now, Sarah was simply grateful to be alive and surrounded by people who would no longer have to whisper about the teammate they thought they had abandoned to die in a foreign desert. As the base medical team checked her injuries and the intelligence officers prepared their questions, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She had proven something to herself during those long weeks alone, that she was tougher than she had ever imagined, and that the training and values that had made her a Navy SEAL were strong enough to carry her through the darkest of times. The mission that had gone wrong and left her stranded had ended. Now began the even more challenging mission of returning to a world that had already written her off as dead and convincing her teammates that she was the same person they had served beside for years. Sarah Martinez was alive, but whether she could truly come home remained to be seen. The military hospital in Germany felt like another planet after 3 weeks in the desert. Sarah lay in a bed with clean white sheets, surrounded by medical equipment and the concerned faces of doctors and nurses. The contrast between her current safety and recent ordeal was so stark that she wondered if she was dreaming. Colonel Rebecca Hayes, the chief medical officer, was a woman in her 50s who had spent her career treating wounded soldiers. She had seen every type of injury and trauma that warfare could produce, but Sarah's case was unusual. Here was a soldier who had endured 3 weeks of survival and evasion without any friendly contact, something that happened rarely and left survivors with complex physical and psychological challenges. Your body has been through hell, Dr. Hayes explained during the initial examination. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, multiple lacerations, signs of exhaustion, and what appears to be the beginning of a respiratory infection. But considering what you've been through, you're in remarkably good condition. The physical healing would be the easy part. Sarah's body was young and strong, and military medicine had advanced techniques for treating combat-related injuries and stress. The psychological recovery would be far more complex and long-lasting. Dr. James Morrison, the staff psychiatrist, was a quiet man who specialized in treating special operations personnel. His office was designed to feel comfortable rather than clinical, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that encourage conversation. Sarah's first session was scheduled for her third day in the hospital, after her physical condition had stabilized. "I'm not here to analyze you," Dr. Morrison explained during their first meeting. "I'm here to help you process an experience that few people have endured. What you went through there was extraordinary, and it's normal to have strong reactions to extraordinary circumstances." Sarah found herself reluctant to talk about her experience in detail. The weeks alone in enemy territory felt almost surreal now, like something that had happened to someone else. She could discuss the practical aspects, navigation, water procurement, evasion techniques, but the emotional impact was harder to articulate. "I keep thinking about the moment when I heard the helicopter leave," Sarah told Dr. Morrison. "I understood the decision. I would have made the same choice in their position. But knowing that intellectually and accepting it emotionally are two different things. The sense of abandonment was the most difficult aspect to process." Sarah had spent her military career as part of a team, trusting her teammates and knowing they trusted her. The mission had ended that trust in a way that couldn't be easily repaired, even though everyone had acted according to their training and protocols. Meanwhile, word of Sarah's survival was spreading through the military community. The news that a soldier declared Kia 3 weeks earlier had walked out of enemy territory alive was unprecedented. Media attention was building, and military leadership was struggling to manage the story while protecting operational security. Lieutenant Commander Thompson was among the first to visit Sarah in Germany. The man who had made the decision to leave her behind looked haggard and older than his years. Their reunion was awkward and emotional, filled with unspoken questions and complicated feelings. "I thought we had lost you," Thompson said, his voice heavy with emotion. "When that explosion went off and we couldn't reach you, when the enemy reported killing an American sniper, I believe them. I am sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry we didn't wait longer. I'm sorry we didn't come back for you." Sarah studied the man who had been like a big brother to her for 3 years. She could see the guilt and pain in his eyes and realized that her survival had created as many problems as it had solved. Her teammates had been living with the belief that they had abandoned her to die, and her return forced them to confront those feelings. "You made the right decision," Sarah replied, meaning it. "You saved the team and completed the mission. That's what we're trained to do. If our situations had been reversed, I would have made the same choice. But saying the words and feeling them are different things." Sarah understood the logic of military decision-making, but she couldn't completely suppress the emotional response to being left behind. The rational and emotional aspects of the experience were in conflict, creating a psychological tension that would take time to resolve. Rodriguez visited 2 days later, bringing news from the rest of the team. Shin was being treated for a shoulder injury sustained during the extraction. Davis and Peterson were already back on active duty, but the entire unit was being rotated home for extended leave and psychological evaluation. "We all thought you were dead," Rodriguez said bluntly. "We had a memorial service. Your parents were there. Your sister flew in from medical school. We gave speeches about your courage and sacrifice. And now you're sitting here alive, and I don't know how to process that." The memorial service was particularly difficult for Sarah to accept. Her family had been told she was dead and had gone through the grieving process. Her parents had received a folded flag and condolences from military officials. Her sister had postponed her medical school exams to attend the funeral. The pain her survival had prevented had still been inflicted on the people she loved. "What do I tell your parents?" Rodriguez asked. "They've been through hell. Your mother hasn't slept since we got back. Your father keeps asking if there was anything we could have done differently. Now I have to call them and say their daughter is alive, but I can't really explain why we thought she was dead in the first place." Sarah realized that her survival created complications that extended far beyond her own recovery. Her return from the dead would force everyone who had mourned her to reconsider their grief and their assumptions about what had happened. It was a burden she had never anticipated during her weeks alone in the desert. The psychiatrist helped Sarah understand that survivor guilt could work in reverse. She felt guilty for surviving when others had assumed she was dead, guilty for the pain her supposed death had caused her family, guilty for forcing her teammates to live with the knowledge that they had left her behind. Your survival is not a burden, Dr. Morrison explained. It's a testament to your training, your strength, and your determination. The complications it creates for other people are not your responsibility. You did what you had to do to stay alive, and that was the right thing to do. But Sarah struggled to accept that perspective. She had always been someone who took responsibility for the welfare of others, and learning that her supposed death had caused so much pain made her survival feel somehow selfish. The media attention intensified as news of Sarah's survival became public. Military public affairs officers worked to control the narrative, but the story was too compelling to keep quiet. A female Navy SEAL sniper presumed dead returns alive after 3 weeks alone in enemy territory. It was the kind of story that captured international attention. Sarah was not allowed to speak with reporters while she remained in medical treatment, but she could see the impact the story was having on public perception of women in combat roles. Some commentators used her survival as evidence that women could perform at the highest levels of military service. Others questioned whether her situation would have been different if she had been a male soldier. The political aspects of her story were frustrating for Sarah, who had never seen her gender as a significant factor in her military service. She was a soldier who happened to be a woman, not a woman who happened to be a soldier. The distinction mattered to her, but it seemed to matter less to the people discussing her story in the media. Dr. Hayes noticed that Sarah's physical recovery was proceeding faster than her emotional healing. Her body was responding well to medical treatment, proper nutrition, and rest. Her weight was returning to normal levels. Her injuries were healing, and her respiratory infection had cleared up completely. But Sarah's sleep was troubled by vivid dreams that replayed various aspects of her ordeal. She often woke up thinking she was still in the desert, still being hunted, still trying to reach safety. The transition from constant survival mode to hospital security was difficult for her nervous system to accept. Your body learned to stay hyper-alert for 3 weeks, Dr. Morrison explained. It's going to take time for your system to understand that the danger is over. What you're experiencing is normal for someone who has endured prolonged stress in a life-threatening situation. Physical therapy helped Sarah regain the muscle mass and strength she had lost during her ordeal. The therapists were amazed by how well she had maintained her conditioning despite weeks of limited food and constant stress. Her military fitness training had served her well during the survival experience. But the physical therapy sessions also reminded Sarah of how much she had changed. Her body bore scars from cuts and scrapes sustained during her escape. Her hands showed permanent damage from handling rough rope and sharp rocks. Her face had weathered in ways that made her look older and harder than her 26 years. The most significant change was psychological. Sarah had always been confident and outgoing, quick to joke and laugh with her teammates. Now she found herself more cautious and reserved, analyzing every situation for potential threats, even the safety of a German military hospital. I feel like I'm watching myself from outside, Sarah told Dr. Morrison. The person lying in this bed looks like me and has my memories, but doesn't feel like me. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, the psychiatrist replied. Extreme experiences change us. The question isn't whether you'll be the same person you were before. You won't be. The question is whether you can integrate this experience into a healthy sense of yourself going forward. Sarah's family was scheduled to visit once she was cleared for travel to the United States. The prospect of seeing her parents and sister again was both exciting and terrifying. They had believed she was dead for 3 weeks and had begun the process of learning to live without her. Now, they had to adjust to her being alive, while she adjusted to being someone different from the daughter and sister they remembered. The conversation with her parents over a secure video link was emotional and difficult. Her mother cried throughout the call, repeatedly saying she couldn't believe Sarah was really alive. Her father asked detailed questions about her health and treatment, focusing on practical concerns as a way of managing his emotions. "We're so proud of you," her mother said through her tears. "But we're also angry. Angry that this happened. Angry that we thought we had lost you. Angry that you had to go through this alone. I know that doesn't make sense, but I can't help feeling it." Sarah understood her mother's anger because she felt something similar. She was proud of her survival, but also angry about the circumstances that had made it necessary. She was grateful to be alive, but also resentful that she had been placed in a situation where survival required such extreme measures. Her sister Maria was perhaps the most direct in her response. "I dropped out of medical school for 2 weeks to deal with your death," she said bluntly. "I couldn't concentrate on studying when I thought my sister had been killed. Now I have to figure out how to go back to my normal life knowing that you're alive, but changed in ways I don't understand." The ripple effects of Sarah's ordeal extended to everyone who cared about her, and she was beginning to understand that her survival was just the beginning of a longer process of healing and adjustment for many people. As her release from the hospital approached, Sarah faced the challenge of returning to a world that had moved on without her. Her unit was being reorganized, her personal effects had been packed and shipped to her family, and her military career was in question while leadership decided how to handle her situation. The woman who had entered the hospital 3 weeks earlier as a presumed dead soldier was preparing to leave as a survivor whose story had captured international attention. Sarah Martinez was ready to go home, but home was no longer the same place she had left behind. The military transport aircraft carrying Sarah back to the United States felt like a time machine. She was leaving behind the medical facility in Germany where she had spent a month recovering and returning to a world that had already processed her death and moved forward. The other passengers on the flight were wounded soldiers heading home for treatment. But Sarah's situation was unique. She was returning from the dead. Captain Jennifer Walsh from Navy Personnel Command met Sarah at Dover Air Force Base. Walsh was a career officer who specialized in handling unusual personnel situations, but she had never dealt with a case quite like Sarah's. How do you reintegrate a soldier who was officially declared killed in action and had already been mourned and memorialized? The Navy is still figuring out the administrative aspects of your situation, Walsh explained as they drove toward the naval station where Sarah would be temporarily assigned. "Your death certificate has been rescinded, your benefit status has been restored, and your security clearances are being reactivated. But there are policies and procedures that weren't designed for someone returning from Kia status." The practical challenges were significant, but manageable. The emotional and psychological challenges would be far more complex. Sarah was being assigned to a transition unit that specialized in helping special operations personnel adjust to different phases of their careers. It was usually used for soldiers retiring from active duty, but it seemed appropriate for someone transitioning back from the dead. Sarah's first stop was the family quarters where her parents and sister were waiting. The reunion was intensely emotional, with everyone trying to process feelings that couldn't be easily categorized. Her parents had already grieved her death and were now experiencing a form of resurrection that challenged their understanding of loss and recovery. "I kept your room exactly the same," her mother said, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't bear to change anything. Part of me believed that if I kept everything the way you left it, you might somehow come back." Sarah's childhood room looked like a shrine to a person who no longer existed. High school trophies, college photos, military academy mementos. Everything represented the young woman she had been before her ordeal. Looking at these artifacts of her former life, Sarah felt disconnected from the person they represented. Her sister Maria was completing her medical school rotations and had taken leave to be present for Sarah's return. As a medical student, Maria was particularly interested in the psychological aspects of her sister's experience. "You're different," Maria observed during their first private conversation. I can see it in your eyes, the way you hold yourself, how you react to sounds. It's like you're the same person, but operating from a completely different baseline. Sarah appreciated her sister's directness. Everyone else had been treating her carefully, as if she might break under too much scrutiny. Maria's medical training allowed her to observe and discuss changes without judgment or excessive emotion. 3 weeks alone in hostile territory changes you, Sarah replied. I had to become someone who could survive that experience. Now I'm trying to figure out how to be someone who can survive civilian life. The challenge of returning to normal social interactions was more difficult than Sarah had anticipated. Simple activities like going to a restaurant or shopping mall were overwhelming. The crowds, noise, and unpredictable movement of people triggered anxiety responses that she struggled to control. Dr. Elizabeth Santos, a psychologist at the Naval Medical Center, specialized in treating special operations personnel with unique trauma experiences. Sarah's case was unlike anything in the literature, requiring a customized approach to therapy and recovery. You experienced a form of social death followed by resurrection, Dr. Santos explained. Your family and colleagues went through the grieving process and began to establish a new normal without you. Now everyone has to reverse that process while you simultaneously try to integrate your survival experience. The therapy sessions helped Sarah understand that her feelings of disconnection and alienation were normal responses to abnormal circumstances. She was not broken or damaged. She was adapting to experiences that few people had endured. Meanwhile, the Navy was struggling to determine Sarah's future role. Her survival story had made her internationally famous, but fame was not always compatible with special operations work that required anonymity and secrecy. Leadership had to balance Sarah's value as a symbol and role model with her effectiveness as an operational asset. Admiral Patricia Morrison, the highest-ranking woman in naval special operations, met with Sarah to discuss her career options. Morrison was a mentor figure who understood the unique challenges faced by women in elite military units. Your survival has made you a symbol whether you wanted that or not, Admiral Morrison explained. We could try to put you back into an operational role, but your recognition factor makes that problematic. Alternatively, we can find ways to use your experience and expertise in training or leadership roles. Sarah had mixed feelings about becoming a symbol or role model. She had joined the military to serve her country, not to represent anything beyond her own commitment and competence. But she also understood that her story had inspired other women considering military careers and had demonstrated capabilities that challenged traditional assumptions. The decision about her future was complicated by ongoing security investigations. Sarah's survival and escape had provided valuable intelligence about enemy operations, but it had also raised questions about operational security and mission planning. Multiple agencies wanted to debrief her extensively about every aspect of her experience. The intelligence debriefings were exhausting and sometimes traumatic. Sarah was required to relive her ordeal in minute detail, describing everything she had seen, heard, and done during 3 weeks of survival and evasion. The information was valuable for improving future operations, but the process was emotionally draining. Colonel Harrison from the forward operating base where Sarah had been rescued visited her at the naval station. He brought greetings from the soldiers who had participated in her extraction and wanted to hear her perspective on the experience. Your survival and the intelligence you gathered probably saved lives, Harrison told her. The enemy tactics and capabilities you observed helped us adjust our operations and avoid several potential casualties. Learning that her survival had produced valuable intelligence helped Sarah find meaning in her ordeal. She had not simply endured 3 weeks of hardship. She had gathered information that would help protect other American soldiers. It was a purpose that aligned with her values and military commitment. The reunion with her original team was scheduled for 2 months after her return to the United States. Thompson, Rodriguez, Chun Davis, and Peterson were all dealing with their own psychological challenges related to the mission and its aftermath. Group therapy sessions were arranged to help everyone process the complex emotions involved. "I've been having nightmares about leaving you behind," Chen admitted during their first group session. "I keep replaying that moment when we had to choose between waiting for you and protecting the team. Knowing that you survived makes it both better and worse." Rodriguez struggled with survivor guilt that was the mirror image of Sarah's experience. "Why did you make out alive when other soldiers in similar situations don't?" he asked. "What made you special or different? And why do I feel guilty about being relieved that you survived?" The group therapy sessions revealed that everyone had been changed by the experience. The mission had ended their innocence about the costs of special operations work and had forced them to confront the reality that their brotherhood could be broken by circumstances beyond their control. Dr. Santos facilitated discussions about trust, abandonment, survival, and the nature of military commitment. The team had to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by extraordinary circumstances while accepting that some things had changed permanently. "You're all different people now than you were before the mission," she told them. "The question isn't how to go back to who you were. The question is how to move forward as the people you become." Sarah's relationship with Thompson was particularly complex. He remained her commanding officer, but their professional relationship had been altered by the decision to leave her behind and her subsequent survival. Both had to navigate new dynamics while maintaining military discipline and effectiveness. "I need to know that you can still follow my orders," Thompson said during a private conversation. "I need to know that what happened hasn't undermined your trust in my leadership to the point where we can't function as a team." Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "I trust your judgment and your commitment to the mission and the team. But I also know that circumstances might require similar decisions in the future. I can live with that intellectually, but I'm not sure how I'll react emotionally if it happens again." The honesty of their conversation was both painful and healing. They were acknowledging that their relationship had been permanently changed while committing to finding a way forward that served both their personal needs and professional responsibilities. Physical fitness became an important part of Sarah's recovery process. Training with her team helped reestablish normal patterns and rebuild confidence in her physical capabilities. But even routine exercises triggered memories of her survival experience and required conscious effort to maintain focus. "Your body remembers everything," the team's fitness instructor observed. "It remembers the stress, the exhaustion, the constant vigilance. You have to retrain your nervous system to understand the difference between training stress and survival stress." Sarah's first operational assignment after returning to duty was carefully chosen to ease her transition back to active service. She was assigned to a training role, helping to develop survival and evasion curricula for other special operations personnel. It allowed her to use her experience constructively while avoiding the high-stress environment of active missions. The training assignment was successful and personally satisfying. Sarah found that teaching survival techniques to other soldiers gave meaning to her ordeal and helped her process her own experience through a different lens. She was not just a victim of circumstances, she was a survivor with valuable knowledge to share. Students in her survival courses were initially intimidated by her reputation, but quickly learned to appreciate her practical approach and hard-won expertise. Sarah's teaching style was direct and realistic, based on actual experience rather than theoretical knowledge. "Survival isn't about being tough or heroic," she told her students. "It's about making good decisions under stress and refusing to give up when everything goes wrong. Most of what you need to know is common sense applied consistently under pressure." After 18 months of therapy, administrative processing, and careful reintegration, Sarah was offered the opportunity to return to operational status with a new team. The assignment would mark her complete transition from survivor back to active duty special operations personnel. The decision was difficult. Operational service was what Sarah had always wanted, but she was no longer the same person who had originally pursued that goal. Her priorities had shifted, and she was not sure whether the military lifestyle still aligned with her personal values and objectives. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Admiral Morrison told her during their final counseling session. You've already demonstrated your capabilities beyond any reasonable doubt. Whatever you decide about your future should be based on what you want to do, not what others expect you to do. Sarah realized that survival had taught her something unexpected about herself. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, but she was also more aware of what truly mattered to her. The experience had clarified her values and priorities in ways that would influence every future decision. The woman who had been left for dead in a desert canyon 3 years earlier was now ready to write the next chapter of her story. Sarah Martinez had proven that she could survive anything, but more importantly, she had learned how to live with the consequences of survival. She was no longer running from death or towards safety. She was simply moving forward as someone who understood both the fragility and resilience of human life. The team that had once whispered about abandoning her now looked to her as an example of what was possible when training, determination, and courage came together under impossible circumstances. Sarah Martinez had returned from the dead, but she had also returned to life with a deeper understanding of what both meant. Her survival was no longer just a personal victory. It had become a testament to the power of human resilience and the importance of never giving up hope, even in the darkest circumstances. The woman they had left behind had become someone who would never be left behind again, because she had learned how to find her way home no matter how far the journey might be.